Today I'll be talking about my experience using the DJI Ronin S2 and comparing it to the Ronin S that I formerly owned, talking about the upgrades, the features, and the benefits, and helping you decide on which gimbal is worthy of your investment. There are a surprising number of features and benefits that DJI added to the Ronin S2 over the Ronin S that really enhances the user experience and makes using it and setting up a lot better. But obviously the most important feature of a gimbal is if it can produce stable footage. If it can't do that, then the other benefits don't really matter. So my experience between the two, truthfully, I wasn't very happy with the original Ronin S, to the point where I ended up returning it after a few projects. The Ronin S2 is another story. I am quite happy with the RS2, and none of the major problems I was seeing with the original seem to be showing up in the newer version. What I mean mostly is no matter how perfectly I balanced the Ronin S, played around with the calibration and stiffness settings, I was always seeing micro shakes during movement, as you can see here. And this is using a 17mm, where it should be difficult to see small imperfections. It's nothing huge, and I'm probably being overly picky, but I was fully expecting buttery smooth movement. Instead, I had to use Final Cut Pro stabilization on almost every clip that I included in the final edits for these real estate projects, which most of the time does help to get rid of the micro shakes without too much added distortion. I did some digging online and found a few forums where numerous people were complaining about the exact same thing, so I don't think it was an issue with my unit specifically. Now, comparing those shots to these, using the Ronin S2 once again at 17mm, I do not see any of those small, same micro shakes, which was by far the most important thing for me. I will admit that it's extremely subtle, especially after comparing the two. But what it looks like to me is that the Ronin S will sway just maybe a degree or two off its X and Y axis. The Ronin S2 seems to just be able to counteract my movement perfectly. I'll leave affiliate links down below to both DJI gimbals. First benefit is what we kind of already discussed, but the stabilization algorithms are updated and more advanced, which is obvious to me from use and seeing the smoother footage. There is also a super smooth mode, which reportedly lets you stabilize tighter lenses up to 100mm. I haven't tested this out myself, but from what I've seen online, it seems like this feature provides legitimate benefits, and I plan to test this out thoroughly in a later video. Another bonus is the weight of the actual unit. The Ronin S2 handle and battery grip come in at 2.94 pounds, while the RS is about 4 pounds. This is achievable by the arms being made of carbon fiber, which make it lighter and stronger. The RS arms were only aluminum alloy. Also contributing to the weight reduction is probably that the RS2 handle and battery grip are shorter in length, which makes it overall more compact. These weights of the RS2 and RS, however, do not include the tripod grips, which are around a half a pound, and the mounting plates, which are less than a quarter pound. That's a pound difference between the RS2 and the RS, which felt quite obvious for me while shooting for a couple hours with both the gimbals. Having a lighter setup just saves the arms and back, especially the back. Then closely related is the weight capacity, which once again is influenced by the carbon fiber arms. The RS2 claims to be able to safely handle 9.9 pounds over the 7.9 pounds that the original could. These weight limits probably need to be taken with a grain of salt though, but I've seen people trying cinema cameras on the RS2. From what I gather, it is possible with some lens and battery combinations, but the limitation seems to be the physical space. Bigger cameras just end up getting in the way of the arms. Next is the ability to lock the axes in the arms. This is a massive benefit for balancing the gimbal, locking off each axis besides the one you are balancing, and the locks are also very useful when storing the RS2 when traveling. The old RS had no locks on its arms, so unless you strapped it down, the arms would move around freely, which was very inconvenient, and caught my fingers a couple times during handling. For most camera setups, you also couldn't put the gimbal back in the RS styrofoam case, which was very unfortunate. The new case for the RS2 has loads of room to store the gimbal in any configuration, which lets you pre-balance before you go out shooting. The only thing you can't store together is the two mounting plates attached to the gimbal, but every other axis can be balanced, locked, and stored. Big upgrade to ease of use. The case itself is also a lot smaller and more functional. Every pocket is used for equipment, and there isn't a lot of extra wasted space. Stepping back slightly to those two mounting plates I mentioned are also a great addition. Instead of just having one plate that the RS2 had that needed to be rebalanced each time you took your camera off and back on the gimbal, now there are two mounting plates, so you can detach the top plate from the bottom plate and move between handheld and gimbal use in a literal second. To me, this feature alone is worth upgrading for. A cool thing DJI added also was a fine-tuning knob to the bottom release plate. Instead of having to shift it back and forth manually, which I was always overshooting or undershooting the balance spot, This knob controls the movement on the track and lets you make extremely fine adjustments. Moving to the other parts of the arms are the tightening knobs. This isn't a huge upgrade, but it's nice. You can raise the lock knobs to increase the tightness or go in the opposite direction to loosen the arms for less resistance. No screwdrivers needed. DJI also coated the arms with Teflon. This is why you'll see on other reviews, most people mention how much easier it is to slide the arms back and forth, which is much more difficult on the RS because the movement is far stiffer. DJI also decided to include an additional grip that lets you go into briefcase mode. The RS didn't come with this and you had to buy it from a third-party supplier. The focus wheel on the RS2 is now embedded in the handle, instead of being an additional accessory on the RS. It was also moved to a more appropriate location. It can easily be controlled using your index finger while you have a grip on the gimbal, while before the focus wheel was on the side and required an independent hand to use. Moving on down the RS2, it now has a 1.4-inch color screen, which is incredibly useful. The screen lets you adjust most of the gimbal settings, which was only accessible on the RS if you connected your phone through the Bluetooth app. The screen can also give you a live feed of what your camera sees if you have the Raven Eye attached, which will let you set your target for Active Track 3.0 without using the app. A little more on that later. A slight drawback of having the screen is that it's easy to accidentally touch with your hands while you're operating the RS2. However, it is possible to lock the screen. So at least that option is there, but it's still a little bit tedious locking and unlocking every time you want to do it. It's a great feature, but unfortunately the locking mechanism doesn't lock the other buttons on the gimbal, like the M button, which will change your operating settings if you press it. It would have been better if the lock mode locked everything on the screen as well as the buttons and the joystick. I also like the screen because the main page shows you how hard the motors are working. If the gimbal symbol is green, it means the camera is perfectly balanced. If it's yellow, it means it's not perfectly balanced and the motors are working a little harder, but you can still operate the gimbal. And red means it's not balanced at all and needs to be before proceeding with operation. I personally like to do a formal balance test before I start shooting, but if you have a zoom lens or ND filters, or if you are switching between handheld and gimbal use and maybe didn't slide the camera all the way before locking in, it's great to just quickly look at the screen and see if you're still balanced well enough for the gimbal to properly function. Realistically, given that the motors are rated to stabilize much heavier loads than a standard DSLR or mirrorless camera, it's fair to assume that the addition or removal of a filter or extension of a zoom lens shouldn't be too much for the motors to work a little harder and still give you that green excellent balance icon. A nice little feature that isn't specific to the screen, but given that it can easily be accessed through the screen, is that one of the new follow features available is vertical mode, which is great for social media. Previously setting this up required a separate attachment, I believe, and another round of balancing. Now it's a click of a button away to easily enter horizontal or vertical shooting modes. Another product that is sold in the premium combo is the Raven Eye system. I'm not going to go too in depth in this video because it has a lot of features and functions that I will dedicate a whole video to in the near future. But I have seen it in action and it's a really great addition to the Ronin S2 system, which I think is more than worth the upgrade from the standard package. The Raven Eye lets you transmit a live feed to your phone to use as a monitor at 1080p with a 656-foot range and only 60 millisecond latency. Not only does it give you a live feed, but it also lets you use one of DJI's most recent tracking algorithms, Active Track 3.0. DJI did release the Air 2S with Active Track 4.0 back in April 2021, but the 3.0 version is still better than what was available back on the Ronin S. Lastly, the Raven Eye also lets you use the gyro data in your camera to control the gimbal itself. Turn your camera one direction and the gimbal follows. This was also a feature on the original Ronin S, but from what I've seen, the newer versions have better gyro control and object tracking. Like I said, I'll be testing these features and the performance of Raven Eye extensively and will upload a dedicated video in the very near future. The last few upgrades that the Ronin S2 has over the Ronin S is associated with the battery. For one, you can now charge it independently. For the RS, you had to connect it to the gimbal handle because that's where the plug was. Now it's much easier to just charge the handle directly. And as far as the battery life goes, the RS2 and the RS both are rated for 12 hours. But when using a proper charger, charging time is reportedly 1.5 hours instead of 2.25 hours that it is on the RS. Also, a small upgrade is that the battery is a cartridge style. You pop it in the gimbal handle, which lightly locks it, and then you tighten it with the lever. I believe the old style would have been that you had to hold it in place while tightening the lock. This is just a little easier. So where's the best place to buy the Ronin S or the RS2? Well, it's actually a little hard to find the original RS as it's been out of production for a while. But like I said, right now it's 30% off of Amazon US, but the price could change any day. The links are below, and I personally prefer buying from Amazon as they have a 30-day return policy instead of DJI's 14-day. And Amazon, more often than not, will cover the return shipping cost, while I don't believe DJI does. Once the Raven Eye tutorial and review video is live, I will have it linked here and down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. And RS, which quelt fight. That's a pound difference between the RS2 and the RS. Which felt quite obvious